Good morning, all, and thanks. Come on in and come on up front. My name is Jim Balaki. I am the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Energy, Installations, and Environment. It's great to be with this group this morning. Thank you all for joining us. I have the pleasure of hosting this panel today where we'll be talking about the strength behind naval installations, and with a panel of well-regarded guests here to join me, who I'll introduce in just a moment. Before I do, I'd like to set the stage for our conversation just with a couple of opening remarks. Secretary of the Navy Carlos del Toro has highlighted three enduring principles for our naval force. First, maintaining maritime dominance and defense of our nation. Secondly, empowering our people. And thirdly, strengthening strategic partnerships. And I believe that through the questions and answers that you hear today, these themes will be woven in the responses from our colleagues. When we talk about the strength of our naval installations, a focus on resilient energy, water, cyber capabilities, and their importance to the mission. Let me just pause there. The mission really is where we're going to look to focus. Rapidly evolving technologies, climate change, and cybersecurity have brought the nation to an inflection point, which necessitates a wholesale transformation of how we see and power our society and our military. And we heard some of that in the previous panel. The range of the threats today that we have is growing, and it's both in frequency and complexity, forcing us to adapt in new and different ways. The Department of the Navy recognizes the complexities and interdependencies of energy demand and mission readiness, and the mission capability that require missions installations to build on the resilience across their energy, water, and transportation systems. And this essentially for installations is the essence of maritime dominance. Securing critical infrastructure both within the installations and outside our naval fence lines is also integral to the readiness of those forces, and thus that resilience also involves strategic partnerships that extend into our communities, schools, industries, and all of those entities that support sailors and Marines and their families. As we consider the impacts to the strength of our naval installations, energy disruption, attacks on networked cyber control systems, climate-related events, and even as we found out over the last 2 years, pandemics, all acknowledged as a threat to force readiness and new and sometimes changing ways. And these threats pose vulnerabilities to the capabilities of our force. So I am joined today, and I'd like to now turn my attention to the panelists. I'll introduce them, and then we'll start a number of questions. And then, if any of you were here for the previous panel, we'll open up to questions from the audience. First, I'm joined by Captain Patrick Dugan from the Coast Guard. He serves as the Chief of the Coast Guard's Office of Civil Engineering, where he's responsible for overseeing all facility construction and maintenance for the Coast Guard's thousands of shore assets, in addition to his designation as the Coast Guard's real property manager. I happen to know what that means. It's not fun. Prior engineering and acquisition tours by Captain Dugan include assignments as a commanding officer of Facilities and Design and Construction Center. Captain Dugan was commissioned from the Coast Guard Academy with a bachelor's degree and master in marine science. He also holds a master's degree in ocean engineering from the University of New Hampshire, and is a registered professional engineer in the state of Ohio. So welcome, Patrick. Next, I'd like to introduce one of my colleagues, Miss Sandra Klein. Sandy is the Navy's first Director for Installation Resilience, and she serves the Navy's Secretary for Energy, Installations, and Environment. And along with her myriad of responsibilities, she is responsible for the policy development and program oversight for installation resilience, including energy, water, cyber control system security, climate resilience, and we're grateful to have her extensive Navy background as an integrator and innovator, which uniquely qualify her for the challenges of this position. Previously, Ms. Klein served as the Deputy Director for the Navy's $3.6 billion military construction program and the Chief Information Officer at the Naval Facilities Engineering Command, and she's also held positions at the Naval Sea Systems Command and with Naval Supply Systems Command. So welcome, Sandy. And finally, we're joined by Mr. Greg Bowman, the Vice President of Corporate Development and Chief Innovation Officer at Siemens Government Technologies, where he is focused on driving strategic growth by leveraging Siemens' global portfolio to help the government in solving complex problems in energy, automation, and digitalization. Prior to joining Siemens, Mr. Bowman served in the United States Army for more than 25 years, including as a senior advisor to two secretaries of the Army and two acting secretaries of the Army. I know what that means, too. That's a lot of work. Mr. Bowman holds a Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law, a Master of Military Law and Government, contracting from the U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Legal Center, a Master of Military Arts and Sciences from the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College, and a bachelor's degree from Longwood University, where he graduated as a distinguished military graduate. So thank you to all of our panel members. And now I'll kick off the conversation by asking a couple of questions from some of the panel members to see if we can draw out some interesting threads. So let me start, perhaps, Captain, with you. Can we get an idea of how the Coast Guard is working to achieve the goals that are outlined in the executive order in 14057, the President's executive order on catalyzing clean energy industries and jobs through federal sustainability, more specifically, a 65% reduction in greenhouse gases?
Well, thank you, Jim, and welcome to everyone here. Coast Guard I was very pleased to see the executive order come out, and we're moving pretty far on that. We have, I'll address a few parts of it, and you'll pardon me as I do glance at my notes a few times, but I'll address a few parts of the executive order. We have the 100% carbon pollution-free electricity. We're at about 7% of all our electricity right now is carbon pollution-free. Goal is about 7.5% right now. And we're doing that. That's a facility, mainly facilities there, where we're tapping into either local, how local electricity is generated. I'll highlight one of my favorite places, Kodiak Island, Alaska, where they are 99.5% renewable on electricity, on the electric grid. And that's our biggest base. I won't get into how they're doing it, but that's our biggest base. And we are shifting from fossil fuels there in Kodiak for our buildings over to electricity. And the housing we just built in Kodiak a couple years ago was all electric. No more fuel heating, it's all electric there. Just one example there. Our 100% zero emission vehicle goal going on right now. We're working with GSA. Coast Guard has a number of vehicles, most of which are not owned by our service. So we work with GSA, we lease vehicles from GSA, and we're electrifying our fleet as we speak. It's pretty easy to do with sedans. We've gotten pretty far. We have charging stations going up right now at our major bases. And the tough nut's gonna be, we tow a lot of boats in the Coast Guard. And the F-350-like vehicle isn't quite out there yet for electric, but we're getting there. So as industry progresses, so will we. You mentioned greenhouse gases. That's mainly, our main greenhouse gas producers are our aircraft and ships. And last panel up here, Admiral Thomas mentioned a little bit about how we're trying out some biodiesel. One of our cutters up in Washington right now is trying out 50% biodiesel. We have actually reduced our greenhouse gas emissions. We've achieved a 49% reduction since our baseline in 2008. How do we do that? Well, if you were at the Commandant's first speech this morning, we've invested heavily in new cutters and new aircraft, and that's mainly how we're reducing that. There are some portions on the shore side. We have a facility up at the Baltimore Yard, our Coast Guard shipyard in Baltimore, which is a renewable energy center. And we've broken ground on a large photoelectric farm in Petaluma, California. But we do that, and I'll echo Admiral Thomas, who was up here before, we do that in support of our mission. Our mission is the driver, and we follow on with renewable energies.
Great, thanks, Captain. Ms. Klein, perhaps we could explore what steps the Assistant Secretary of the Navy is taking to make progress towards achieving the goals laid out in the same executive order, more specifically with the electrification of the fleet.
Sure, great question. So the executive order really complements the Secretary of the Navy's vision that they've already laid out in terms of energy. And that's really focused on installation resilience. And so on the installation side, we're focused on resilience and reliability and efficiency. So the executive order really looking at how do you mitigate climate change, how do you adapt through reduced energy consumption and also moving to electrification really complements the vision that we already have. And we're really looking for those synergies where we're doing things to mitigate and adapt to climate change that also increase mission readiness, whether it's duration time on site or it's using other technologies. So we're really seeing that executive order as kind of a catalyst and a unifier to bring together things that we were doing sort of in a smaller scale, but partnerships with industries and academia to really make those investments in new technology and innovation. In terms of electric vehicles and electrification, on the installation side, we're really investing right now in trying to do the fundamental planning and use case to development to understand what are those requirements for non-tactical vehicles. Those are the vehicles that we lease from GSA. The Navy and Marine Corps together have about 40,000 of those on our bases. And as Patrick indicated, really it's not the small cars, it's sort of the medium and larger vehicles that we're going to need to do the work on the bases. But that's not the only place we see electrification. So we're trying to understand now what is the electrification that we need to provide for people living and working on our bases, for those non-tactical vehicles. We're also piloting some tactical vehicle pilots in a couple of places to understand what that demand could look like and how do we meet that? And then to get data, we call it telematics data, that helps us actually understand the use cases that we're gonna have with those vehicles so that as we go out and we make upgrades and start to deploy permanent infrastructure, we understand where are the right places to put that infrastructure. So a lot of it's right now is just really understanding the requirements and trying to sort of break down the walls that exist today between the exchanges and unaccompanied housing and non-tactical vehicles that today are all managed by different people, funded by different resources. So how do we pull all those different needs together and create an understanding of what electrification looks like on what I sort of say is the non-tactical side? And then we're also partnering with the operational energy side and the platform folks to start to understand what is their demand over time going to look like, because they're going to move to electrification, particularly in the area of unmanned assets. And so how do we start to understand that too, so that as we modernize and upgrade on our installations, we're doing it in a way that can scale over time to meet the uptick in demand that we know is coming from electrification. We're also doing some cool kinds of pilots. I think there was some news out this past week that the Marine Corps has gone out and bought a number of beam charging infrastructure. And so what that is actually mobile chargers. We've got about 14 of those that are being deployed at multiple Navy and Marine Corps bases to help us just understand, again, what are those use cases? Let's put it here and see if that's the right place, or do we need to move it? And then it also allows us to do work in remote locations and also to look at charging equipment, which is another piece of this demand as we start to automate and electrify port ops and air ops. What does that charging demand look like? How big is it? When does it occur? And where do we have to place that charging infrastructure? We're partnering with the state of California and the California Energy Commission to try and do some of those pilots. They're making huge investments in transportation, electrification, billions of dollars a year. So working with them as they're trying to sort of quantify what they're seeing outside the fence line and how can we work with them to create blueprints or models that would be applicable for us on our basis.
Thanks, Sandy. Mr. Bowman, kind of keeping with the same theme here on this executive order, can you tell us what Siemens is doing to support the federal agencies in achieving the goals laid out in the executive order with respect to energy and water? And then maybe one additional twist, and from the perspective of industry, what risks do you see out there in trying to move that agenda forward?
Oh, that's a great question, sir. Thank you. At Siemens and really at all of the energy companies that are out there now, when we got that executive order, it said that the government wanted to do a whole of government approach. We immediately crossed out the word government and put whole of nation approach, because that's the way we were focused on this. I mean, we look at the energy sector right now, and Siemens does a large amount of work in the energy sector, but also in other areas as well. But we look at it as an innovation platform. Instead of energy services companies, we view ourselves and our partners in industry as energy innovation companies. And we want to thank the Navy for what they do to lean forward in this area. I mean, one of the areas we've seen the greatest impact has been the willingness of the Navy and the Sea Services to lean forward to drive innovation at the base level. And so as we look at how we're able to implement some of these very aggressive goals in that executive order and how we can help the Coast Guard, the Navy, the Marines, all of the services, and really all of the government achieve these goals, we look at it from an innovation perspective. You know, I have 2 dates on stickies on my monitor at home and at the office. One is my wedding anniversary, so I can continue living. And the second one is the date the iPhone was introduced. Because when Steve Jobs announced that the iPhone was coming out on January 9th, 2007, that was the beginning of a revolution in how we looked at innovation, how we communicated, how we did data, how we understood the world. Today in the energy sector, it's exactly at the same inflection point. We're going to look back and see that the mission of the Navy and the Sea Services, the mission of your partners, and the ability to get at a readiness issue. We talk a lot about energy efficiency and the importance of climate, and just a fascinating panel last time about climate. But this is about readiness. If you don't understand this, we as your partners do, the enemy is at the gate. The battle space is no longer overseas, it's next door. And in order to be able to project power, in order to be able to protect our families, in order to be able to get at the climate goals, which are national security imperatives, the only way to do that is with innovation. And the only way to do that is with partnership. And so we are very proud of looking at innovation, driving changes, looking at whole of installation approaches, looking at new ways to do contracting. One of the great things about what the Navy has leaned forward to, and I see my good friend John Klein out there, is to lean forward in how we procure, to get industry in earlier, to see what's out there. The power of early contractor involvement cannot be overstated. And you all have really led the way in doing that, because what you've done is allowed us to come in and say, here's your problem, here's your issue, here's your climate goals, here's what you're trying to achieve by doing these great things for our nation. How can we help? And the earlier we're involved in that, the better we can give you what you want at a rapid pace. And that's the other thing we look at too. Right now, the Navy has leaned forward, and Ms. Klein mentioned about data. Right now, the ability to use data is stronger than ever before. The ability to use digital tools to get that data, make it meaningful, and innovate off of that is something that we have seen never before. Because right now, a good example is what the Navy's doing with the shipyards. The Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program that NAVFAC now currently runs is looking at 4 different major shipyards and is going to go from end to end to understand how they can operate more effectively and efficiently. Not only is that the processes and how the facility is laid out, but it's also climate. All of that data can be put into a model, can be used to determine the best operations of the plant, to be the best operations of when to bring ships in, to help schedule that, to define what energy needs are out there and how to best integrate renewables. All of that data then becomes a living, breathing model that allows the Navy to constantly innovate, constantly upgrade, and constantly prepare. As the enemy gets closer and our standoff ranges get shorter, we have to be able not to predict, but to prepare. And as your partner, that's our goal.
Great, thanks, Greg. So Ms. Klein, let me come back to you and sort of ask, and maybe keeping a little bit on this theme of innovation. I'm kind of inspired by that. Can you talk about perhaps what, in an innovative way, the Navy is doing to update its aging infrastructure, which may be not as innovative as we'd like it to be right now?
Sure. So, we're doing it across multiple fronts or multiple modalities. The first is as we're designing and building new infrastructure through either military construction or renovations or repairs, we've invested monies that we've gotten from Congress for resilience to actually, over the last couple of years, we've gotten a total of $82 million to really make an investment in tools and capabilities to help us do better master planning and design and construction. And so we're doing everything from how do we look at the standards for hangar doors and make them hurricane resistant, to seismic studies to really understand specific soil conditions at a shipyard so that we are updating unified facilities criteria and user guides. We're also sort of working and dabbling in a partnership with the Army to look at this concept of engineering with nature, which in my mind is kind of almost analogous to defense in depth, where you have a fence and different things that are sort of like physical security layers. And so how do we use nature to sort of build with nature and make our bases more resilient? And an example could be, you're building a living reef on the coastline, and by having that reef there, then it mitigates some of the storm surge. And so now if you're building a seawall, maybe you don't spend as much money on concrete, which generates CO2 in your building of your seawall. So we're trying to innovate sort of that way on the front end, and also do innovations. I mean, we heard from the panel before how our bases are ecosystems. And so again, where you can do better land management, whether you can have stronger ecosystems, that goes towards things like mitigation of climate impacts, looking at carbon sequestration. So again, things that we can do to mitigate extreme weather certainly help reduce the wear and tear on the facilities that we have and the facilities that we're building. So that's definitely one of the ways. I think the other way that's kind of innovative is really leveraging the mission assurance process. And so that's a capability that is used, it comes out of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but it's really how do we look at our bases and ensure that those most critical assets are protected and can perform their missions. And so it starts as kind of like a really tight concentric circle around that asset, but then the circle goes out, and what are the systems, power, water, HVAC that support that, telecom. And so you go out over time. And so one of the things that we're really doing is kind of understanding what those assets are, what are the systems that support it, and trying to have a more holistic systems approach. So we're prioritizing our critical assets and where do we invest, but then we've also done a process of installation, energy, and water planning processes where we have a portfolio of what are all of the different energy and water security gaps. And then that's where we can bring in industry early and say, how can we partner? So here's what's really important to us. Here's the very tight concentric circle, but what are the systems things that we can invest in that are going to make sense over time and are going to give resilient not just to that asset, but the assets around that asset. I think the other place that we're innovating, and again, more work to do, is really having that idea and conversation outside our communities, outside our fence lines about how we can work together. There's NDA language that came out in 22 that talks about actually bringing the communities further into the master planning process. I routinely do briefs to our community planning liaison officers about what is resilience and how they can help us partner with the communities to do that. I mean, when you look at resiliency and innovation in terms of where we've got really successful smart grids delivering resilience, a piece of those smart grids is actually landfill waste, gas, that's coming from the community. So we're taking something that's a detriment to the community and using it to actually power key critical assets on our bases. And so there's a number of examples like that. And we just recently re-energized an agreement, the relationship that we've had in place with the state of California. It's a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Navy and Marine Corps with the California Energy Commission, but it brings together other stakeholders in the state as well, and state and local communities to really look at where can we do things on our installations that also really benefit those communities outside our installations. So it's no secret that we're doing a lot of industrial processes on our base that potentially have negative impact to people outside the base in economically depressed communities. And so what are things that we can do on the base that help raise everybody up? And so I think, again, just doing more of that and working together to find the innovations, because we don't have all of the technologies that we need to get to where we want to go. And so I think that's where partnering with industry and looking at things we talked about at the last panel, hydrogen. I mean, that's definitely something that we're looking at. We had actually built out some hydrogen refueling centers at Marine Corps bases several years ago when there was work on a hydrogen corridor in California. And so I think some of those kinds of things, and things like geothermal, are going to resurface as the environment's changing, and we're really focused a little bit more heavily on mitigation as part of resilience and readiness.
Thanks, Sandy. So, Captain Dugan, let me come to you, and then I'm going to open the floor up after this question. And Greg, if I need to come back, I'll come back with a
sure.
question if nobody comes up to the microphone. with the Coast Guard being in so many communities, what are you doing to help increase the resilience and reduce the risk to your shore infrastructure as a part of those communities?
Thank you for the question. Kind of going off what Ms. Klein was talking about, we've shifted how we've been building in the Coast Guard. Until about 2017, most of our large MILCON projects were disparate projects, where I would build a pier or build a hangar or renovate a building, but not really have a whole look at the facility, a whole look at the installation. Thanks in part to some hurricanes that came by in 2016 and 2017, and also thanks to really a growth that we've been having in the past few years, we've been doing some much more holistic master planning. We are rebuilding, currently, I'm proud to announce we just awarded, and while the Navy may chuckle, this was big for us, we awarded a $113 million rebuild contract in Borinquen, Puerto Rico, just a few days ago. It was actually part 2. So the total investment down in Western Puerto Rico down there is about 180 or so billion, 100 million, not billion, 180 so million. The first part of that actually was a utilities look, where before you can put the structures up, you need to have your infrastructure first. And it's really a look there in Western Puerto Rico with what the Aguadilla area, as we have a large air station out there, what the Aguadilla area has and how we can work with them, both with renewable power. We have a large solar farm that we're working with prep up with the Puerto Rico electric folks to be able to put our power into their grid, but also be able to send it to ourselves when that need arises. We have a well, probably I think the only well I operate is in Borinquen there. We're doing the same thing in Key West. We're doing a massive rebuild, and we're looking to do some other large-scale rebuilds where we're taking a holistic look at the base. I'm thinking, my mind went over to Station Tybee Island out in Georgia, Savannah area of Georgia. We took the entire station down maybe 4 months ago. Nothing, gone. And unfortunately, most Coast Guard installations, and you guys have seen it, we build a station in 1971, then we add something to it in 83. You've seen this. And what results is you have sheds here and sheds there, and all kinds of concrete. We love concrete too. And you've got pavement everywhere, and this is not good for the environment. It's not good for green space. It's not good for hydrology. Clean the whole thing up, build a energy resilient building, a environmental resilient building. Our building in Tybee, we didn't get really much into fixed floor elevation here, but we use NOAA charts, we use the Army Corps to determine our correct elevation of being on the Coast Guard. And then building a building which is energy resilient, which is hurricane resilient, or in some cases, seismic resilient as needed, and also reduce our footprint and then engage with the community. I mentioned Puerto Rico with the wells, with the power, on how we're dependent upon those folks, all the communities for services, for people, for power, for sewage, for water. Let's work with them and see how we can best partner up. So we're not as mature as I would like us to be, but I really like where we're going with this right now.
Great, great. So we're going to open the floor up to questions. If we don't get any, I've got a couple of more here, but it appears we have one. So if you just let folks know who you are and fire away.
Hi, my name is Tom Bailey, a retired Navy. Just seeing that DOD came out with a climate strategy, I think September 2021. Army has recently come out with an Army climate strategy in February. Is the Navy going to come out with a separate kind of service specific, or are they just going to operate under the DOD?
Sure. So DOD came out with 2 products. One is a climate risk assessment that's really looking more from a warfighting perspective. And then the second was the climate adaptation plan, which is really high level of tenets that mirror and implement Executive Order 14008, which was the strategic visioning. But they haven't come out with specific guidance implementing 14057. The Army did. We're working on a Department of Navy version of that climate plan that I think you'll see out in spring. Again, I think it's strategic. because what we're doing at the secretariat level is really providing the leadership. What are the things that we need to do? Why do we need to do them? And then sort of the how, that's really where we're going to let the services shine and really use their expertise, their technical and acquisition authorities to best value. But that's something that we're working on. I'm intimately involved with that, so be looking for that.
Thank you very much.
Captain Dugan, I'm just wondering, is the Coast Guard also following along? Maybe they've already got one and I just haven't seen it, but are you also thinking about putting together a climate strategy? Is that on the?
So we're actually, we're staying a little bit behind the DHS. We're letting DHS finalize theirs. And we actually are working a draft, but I want to make sure that we don't get ahead of our boss.
Okay, that's always good. Please, sir.
Nick Katsiodis, Watts Constructors. Two questions. What are we doing on the public-private venture scoring problem? I think that's inhibiting leveraging the private sector to fund a lot of this stuff, especially on the naval bases. And then are we doing anything? I know the Navy was using Lincoln Labs a lot. Are we doing anything to score our adversary, which is China, with the silica, which is in most of the PV panels all over the world, as well with rare earth materials? Are we looking at that? Because it's burden, it's buried into most of what we're buying. And I know if you buy the panels from here, it's more expensive. So, the public-private ventures are usually going to the least cost solutions.
Yeah, thanks.
So on the public-private venture, I mean, when I hear that, I think more on the housing side. And so I'm a little confused by that semantic, but I will tell you that what we are heavily involved with is the use of third-party financing. So that's the use of things like enhanced use leases, ESCs and UESC acquisition contracts where we're either partnering with a utility company or an energy savings company. And so we do a lot of work in there. I think we're leading the department in terms of the largest third-party finance contracts awarded, in addition to the most money invested. So right now we've got about $3.2 billion on award. And if you sort of aggregate over the portfolio, it's about $7 billion. So we're doing a lot of work there. We are not doing as much in utilities privatization as some of the other services, but we are trying to jumpstart that program and really move out and do some additional utilities privatization. I think there's a window of opportunity as Build It Back Better is happening, as the utility companies are looking to really make, large-scale modernization efforts. How do we bring that modernization, onto our bases and have the benefits of interoperability? So, I mean, we're definitely looking at that. In terms of rare earth minerals and some of those things, the Department of Navy, in particular on the operational energy side, is really leading all of DoD in its efforts to really look at battery capabilities. There's active efforts to get lithium mining happening in the US and other kinds of mining. So we're definitely not where we need to be, but that is definitely something that's at front and center in the department, and we're trying to actively move out and look at either alternatives to those kinds of things or creating those capabilities within the United States as well. It's a great question.
Greg, let me turn to you then for the next question. With the nation and DoD's focus on decarbonization and energy security, what tools do you think from industry are available for the government to help achieve those goals, and perhaps even as budgets remain flat?
Sure, that's a great question, sir. And it goes back to Ms. Klein's comment about third-party financing. Not only is the ability of industry to help the department achieve its goals focused on technology, it's also focused on how we do contracting. I mean, you cannot print enough money to achieve those goals as the U.S. government. It's impossible. The goals are very aggressive. They are very important. But to do that, you need that whole of nation, whole of industry, whole of government approach. And so what we've worked very closely with, and the Navy actually is working on a project right now, which is the largest energy savings performance contract in U.S. government history down at Guantanamo Bay. And that's combining with distributed energy, the first ever use of liquefied natural gas as a key component of base-wide energy production. It's combining a large-scale industrial battery farm. It has a large-scale industrial-size solar farm. And it also has the ability to integrate wind into that. But it was based on not just the need to get at climate with using renewables. First and foremost, it was based on what does the mission of the base need to support. And that's one of the great things I think about the way DoD has approached this. These goals are very important, but the critical aspect of this is we must be able to defend and project power in and around the world at different key locations. Guantanamo Bay is in a hostile region. It is the only base we have in the Caribbean. It is one that is solely and completely dependent on generating its own power, its own water, its own safety and security. The Coast Guard and the Navy have teamed up to make that a very fortified base. But in order to project power from there, in order to defend that area, you have to be able to do it with reduced capacity. If a hurricane hits, if, for example, you see a problem where you can't get LNG for a couple weeks delivered there, what do? Well, you've got those redundancies. And I think that's one of the key things that the Navy has done is to look at these tools from a contractual perspective and bring in your partners where you're able to produce a project that is completely budget neutral, that has the ability to meet the commander's desire and mission, but also be able to further those climate goals. I think having that mission focus that includes climate, that includes efficiency, that includes renewables is the exact way to approach this. Now, from a Siemens perspective, the same goals that the Navy have, we have. Our goal is to be net zero in 2030. That's our global CEO's goal. And we're doing everything in our power to innovate to do that. But as we move forward, we always keep in mind that we go hand in hand with the customer, but we also are going to do it and we're going to recommend ways that you all can do it in a way that's most effective and efficient. One of the great areas I think that CONUS bases can use is the UESC. Utility energy savings contracts are phenomenal ways to use a partner you already have to bring in those innovations. I mean, if you look at the grid, the biggest problem that CONUS bases have, quite frankly, is transformers. I mean, if the transformer at a local utility goes down, it's really, really hard to get one in a timely fashion to that utility because they're all, for the most part, custom made. One of our great partners, Delta Star Incorporated, they're working on mobile transformers, mobile substations to provide that resiliency so that if a base loses power from their utility grid, that capability is sitting there and they can bring it in and move it around a region to make sure they get what they need. So that capability, sir, I think is really what we can bring to it.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Bowman.
Yes,
Captain, I'm going to come back to you, and I'd like to pull a little bit of a thread on master planning that you talked about. Sure. We've heard a little bit about the digital twin capability. I'm just wondering how you feel, and this is maybe a little bit of a pop-up question, but how you feel about applying that kind of digital twin capability to a master planning scenario, as opposed to just kind of the big sheets of paper that we carry around in binders all over.
I happen to like sheets of paper, but
yeah.
no, it's a great question. And to kind of set the stage a little bit, unlike the DoD is mainly concentrated on large bases. You think of Camp Lejeune, you think of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, you think of giant bases where that kind of technology really lends itself. Coast Guard is much more dispersed. We have some tiny, tiny little things. If you're from around this general area, we have a station in Cape Charles, Virginia. It's very small. We also have larger bases based Portsmouth, Virginia, the Coast Guard Yard, both are near here. Those come to mind. So my answer to you is we're really trying to take a step forward right now with our large bases. We haven't gotten to digital twinning. I actually got a question before we came up on that. We are not yet to that point. I see my successor actually as being able to do that. Okay. Where I'm trying to set up my successor is really have a solid idea, and we're incorporating the Army Corps' Builder program right now on all of our facilities to have a good look at what we have, where we have it, what we need to get to next. And I see the digital twinning as a natural succession to that.
Okay, thanks.
But for our larger bases.
Yeah, thanks. I will remind folks the microphone's still open. I've got a number of questions still to go, but we'd like to hear from you. Please, sir.
I'm Steve Moretto from Department of the Navy. A few years wet back, I wrote a paper on national energy strategy, and as follow-up to that, I started talking to this guy who was the PM of the Project Pele program, small nuclear portable reactors, very interesting discussion. He was saying World War II D-Day was delayed by over a year because they couldn't get enough energy into the theater. So energy is such a vital aspect wherever it is in the world. And then when you think about our adversaries like Russia, who makes, I don't know, about $300 billion a year on energy, to what extent, if you could change your, stop importing any energy from the market and use something like these small modular reactors on your remote bases, could you influence that supply and demand equation? Because if you just reduce the world's demand by, so that the energy went down just by 5%, that's 15 to 20 billion out of Russia's pocket. That's a couple aircraft carriers that they can't build, or thousands of hypersonic missiles that they can't build. So have you thought of that? And, do you have a plan for this new technology that I think the Army is the lead on it right now, and they want to get that into a remote base as a first step. At least that's what they were telling me a couple of years ago. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'll take a shot at that. So there's two pieces to it. The Pele, as I understand it, is really the small micro reactor that's going into a warfighting environment. And so that's one set of technology. And then there's also the small micro reactors that DOE and Idaho Lab are working with the Air Force on, which is really more of this self-contained unit that could do, up to 30 kilowatts of power that would be perfect for installation. So, I mean, we're all very interested in that. And I know that there are utility partners as well that are looking at, when is that technology going to be approved by the regulatory commission so we could move out. So, I mean, I think all of the services see tremendous value on the installation side for doing that. On the operational energy side, that's not in my portfolio. So I'm less close to that. I mean, I think anything that can reduce the amount of fuel, fossil fuel that has to be brought in is of interest to our warfighters, because that's clearly a target. That's clearly where we've had casualties and losses in the past. I think there's some challenges and some concerns about having a nuclear capability like that in a warfighting environment. So I think that's really, and I'm not in a position to comment on that, but just having nuclear, nuclear is considered green energy. And so I think everybody's got to kind of re-look at that. And some of the technologies that they're looking at even would use spent nuclear waste to actually run these new smaller micro reactors. So I think there's a lot of potential in there, and I think we have to be open to all of the ideas and find ways to, be pragmatic, but not, let bureaucracy and history necessarily slow us down from where we need to get to.
So, Mr. Bowman, if I can maybe circle back just a little bit, this talks a little bit about innovation and change. Do you see some other ways that industry can work more closely with the military and maybe the government, federal government, to help achieve the administration's goals, or more broadly to help us, create the impacts and effects we want on our installations? Are there best practices out there, for example?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the great things that we've been able to do is to look at that digitalization capability. Because if you look at the ability right now at a very low cost, you can do a complete digital analysis of an installation, whether it's a force projection platform or a housing area, or it's the ability to look at how you're going to do a maintenance area. All that can be done, and the exciting thing about it is you can use that to make your area development plans. I mean, that way when you're looking at the base of the future, for example, if you look at a submarine base, and you want to look at the base of the future, there's a submarine base that was built in the early 80s, has had extraordinary changes happen to it. Well, wouldn't it be great if you could look at that base from a digital perspective, run 100 different scenarios to see what's the best way to configure it, what's the best place to invest those critical MILCON dollars that Captain Dugan mentioned, that when you get these MILCON dollars in, you want to make sure you get the most capability out of it, but you want to be that long-term effect. You want to be able to have that and see what's coming next. Well, it's really hard to do that. You know, we talk a lot with companies, you know, Fortune 500 companies around the world about how they can build factories, for example. And one of the things that we hear quite often is they want to be disruptive. You know, everybody wants to disrupt the industry. You're going to have the, you know, neatest, greatest gee whiz thing, and it's going to disrupt the industry. Well, every time that happens, somebody else gets disrupted. And eventually, that individual, unless they focus on digitalization and the capability to innovate, they too, in a few years, will be disrupted. So what we want to do is make sure that the Navy and the Coast Guard and the Sea Service and all of DoD is never disrupted. And the technology now is such that you can plan better, you can foresee changes and capabilities better, and you can run 1,000 scenarios against a war plan. That includes not only the operational forces, but also those back at the base. And that's the key. I mean, to us, it has to be that whole approach, because the enemy is attacking us on all fronts, whether it's cyber, whether it's energy, whether it's kinetic. They are attacking us on all fronts. In order to be able to prepare for that, because we can't predict it, in order to be able to prepare for that, we have to be able to see ourselves better, and that's what we think, as your partners, we can do for you.
Great. I'll let that be the last word. I see that our time has expired. I thank all of our guests. This has been a rich and robust discussion. I appreciate it. I'm sure our audience does. And so thank you and good morning to all.
Thanks.